it's helpful to understand a little bit about how iOS apps save information. Now, each app has its own documents directory where they can save files. And basically what this does is it sandboxes or keeps all that app's information in one place, so it normally doesn't affect or can't harm the rest of the information on your phone unless you give explicit permissions. And you may have seen apps that says this app would like permission to access contacts, and you have to give it permission to do that. Otherwise, uh, each app is kind of its own entity. And the paths to those documents directory where you can save information is in a form kind of like a web URL, and we'll use a URL class to kind of get at that path. There's also a file manager class that we can use to get access to this documents directory. So let's go ahead and I'm going to get rid of this information here, so we're just going to duplicate it. And I'm going to rewrite that code, but I'm going to make sure that I save it to a file first. So the next thing I need to do is I need to get a path to my documents directory. So you see I'm using a constant here. And I'm going to use my file manager class and default.urls. I'm going to use this first option. So it says file manager search path directory. And that is actually an enum. And the enum I'm going to use is document directory. I'm going to finish writing this and we'll go back and explain kind of what this is doing. So the for is the document directory and the in is the .user domain mask. I'm going to put .first exclamation point. This URLs method needs two pieces of information. It says what type of files are you looking for, and again we're looking for documents directories, and the user domain mask corresponds to the area on the user's device where their home folder and all apps and data are stored. So the important thing is probably just have to memorize what these two things are, but understand that the user domain mask is the user's area on the device, and this is a list of all the document directories for the apps there. So this is going to give me a whole list or an array of URLs for those documents. So we're using this first to return the first element in that array, which will be the path for our current app. So there's a lot of stuff going on there, and the important thing is just to memorize this because you'll use it whenever you save data. So what this gives us is a folder on our device that we can read and write to. Now what we need is a file name and an extension to save that information. So the file name is like when you have a Word document and you give it a title, and the extension is usually the 3 or 4 letters that go after that. So for example, in a Word document, you have a .docx at the end of that, which tells the computer that it is a Word file or a document file. So we need to come up with a file name and path. And so that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to say let save URL equal documents directory, which is the path we just created to the folder. And I'm going to use appending path component. And I'm going to give it a file name. So I'm going to call it to do test. And the other piece I need is I'm going to use appending path extension. This needs to know the extension, and it is a plist file. So this tells iOS that I'm creating a plist file called to do underscore test, and I'm going to save it in the documents directory. So that's a lot of code, but again, the point of it is this is giving us a place to save our information. So now I can kind of recreate what I did before. So I'm going to create my let property list encoder equals property list encoder. And I'm going to say let encoded to do equals try property list encoder dot encode, And what am I going to encode? My new task. So that's exactly what we saw before, but now I'm actually, instead of just printing it out, I'm going to write it to a file. So I'm going to do try encoded to do, which I just created, dot write, whoops. I'm going to use my, the second one. So to the URL is the save URL we just created. And the writing options, I'm going to put no file protection, which looks pretty scary, but that just means that if I have to update my file, I can write over that file. So again, I use try because write is a throwable method, so I have to use the try so I could get, to avoid the multiple errors or to see the errors as they would come up. So that's it. I've actually written this encoded file to my device, and it would be saved, and if I turn my phone off, it would still be saved. And now I just need a way to retrieve it. So again, it's very similar to what I did before. I'm going to do a let property list decoder equal property list decoder. And then I'm going to do optional binding to retrieve it. If let retrieved to do equals try. This time I'm going to use the data method. I'm going to use data contents of the save URL I created. So data is a class that helps us retrieve things from file storage. So we're using this data class and we're passing it the contents of that URL I created before. And again, this save URL is the file name and extension. So we're saying go ahead and get that, retrieve that file name and extension. So what this first optional binding says is if I can retrieve that information from the save URL. So if I can get that from the save data, now I have to unwrap the decoded message. So if let, so I've retrieved it, I just haven't decoded it. So I'll create another variable called decoded to do, and I'll do the same property list decoder dot decode, and the type is again to do dot self, and the data is retrieve to do. And if that is true, I'll print decoded to do. Phew. Let's see if that works. So you can see I'm getting an error here. The initializer for conditional binding must have optional type. So what it means is I need to make this to do an optional. I'm going to add that and run it. And I get the task down here that has been decoded. So I saved it, retrieved it, and decoded it. So you can see those 3 steps kind of outlined here. This seems like an awful lot of information, and it is. It's going to be something that you'll need to practice. You'll probably have to copy it until it becomes second nature. There's one more thing we haven't done, and that is actually saving an array of information. Now, normally you're not just saving one thing to file storage. Usually it's an array of information. If I had a to-do list app, I'd probably have a lot of things on my to-do list. So usually you're saving an array of data. So I'm just going to, and luckily that's pretty easy to do. I'm going to just create a couple of very quick tasks. Let me do this one. Let's do shop for groceries. And I'll make that Tuesday. And then I'll have let task 3 equal to do Do laundry. I think I spelled laundry wrong. And I'll make that Sunday. And then because I have 3 of them, I'll put task list equals, I'm just going to make an array, new task, task 2, task 3. So I've just created a very quick array of 3 tasks. So now all I have to do is in my encoded to-do line, I'm not doing just a new task, I'm doing task list. And then down here in my property list decoder, instead of to-do.self, I actually want to change it to an array of to-dos. And let's make sure I have no errors. Let's run it. And you can see I got my 3 tasks. So again, all I did was create the array, change what I'm encoding, and then the biggest change was to specify that it's an array of to-dos. And notice I used the greater than, less than. It's how you put a type in for an array. And that's it. So I know this is a lot of information, but once you do this a few times, it becomes second nature, and it is extremely powerful to be able to save your work from session to session on your phone.